bear with me. So I'm going to give you a research update. The Alzheimer's Association International Conference was held just like a week or two ago, and that's the largest convening entity of researchers around Alzheimer's, dementia, and caregiving. And guess what? There's a lot of exciting stuff. So I did this a year ago, and I have huge updates. So I think you heard a little bit about the Alzheimer's Association from Deepa, but we are a national organization, and we are full mission. So we do support research, which is what I'll be talking mostly about today. So this is kind of one of those no-duh slides. So Alzheimer's disease is on a continuum. We know that there are individuals who have that pathology in the brain building upwards of 20 to 25 years before they're symptomatic. Again, that would be another opportunity for an ah. Thank you. I'm making you work for it. Some individuals who are asymptomatic but have that pathology move on to mild cognitive impairment. So there are some cognitive declines, but they're not going to be interfering with the day-to-day life, those daily activities. Some individuals who have MCI will then move into what we probably traditionally know as Alzheimer's disease. Early, middle, late, mild, moderate, severe, whatever you want to call them. So where do you think most of the research right now is focusing on? End stage, early. What about that asymptomatic piece? So what if we can actually identify strategies, treatments, lifestyle changes, so individuals who have that pathology but are asymptomatic remain asymptomatic? That would be great. Thank you. We have one person who said that would be great. That's all I need. I need validation. That is it. So how is Alzheimer's disease currently diagnosed? I could say not very well. So we know it's a real challenge, and there's never going to probably be a single test to identify someone who is living with Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia. The area I wanted to highlight is really kind of new and exciting, and it's these blood or biomarkers, especially blood biomarkers. Apologies to everyone who's eating. I love blood. So biomarkers, kind of a cumbersome term, but it really just describes what can be measured in the body to look for the presence and progression of some sort of disease or condition. So we're really familiar with it with cholesterol. What's the magic number with cholesterol? Under 200. What about blood pressure?
120 over 80.
So those are all biomarkers. They're telling you what's going on in the body. So we have a couple biomarkers that help diagnose or rule out a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Those can be scans of the brain. So we have the PET scans and the MRI. These are now covered by Medicare as a diagnostic tool, and that's huge. That's really significant. There's also the use of cerebral spinal fluid. So again, apologies for everyone who's eating, as a means to identify some of those proteins in the spinal fluid and what that might predict or tell you about what is going on in the brain. The area that's really cool, like I said, blood biomarkers. So why would blood biomarkers be handy? Early intervention. How many people really like getting an MRI or a PET scan? Not really. They're not always accessible. They're not always what we enjoy doing. They're usually expensive and, again, not really as acceptable to patients. And that's why these blood biomarkers could be handy. So every year when we go into the doctor, we usually get a blood panel. Well, as the doctor said, we all need to go to the doctor on a regular basis. So this could potentially be a tool used to kind of identify the presence of Alzheimer's or exclude it. The other piece that's really important with blood biomarkers is it could actually help identify individuals who are appropriate for clinical trials. So we know that the only way we will cure this disease is by participation in clinical trials and research like this. So what's new and exciting? A couple things. FDA approved the first blood biomarker test in the last couple of months. Okay, again, woo! Okay. I need your pound sticks. That's what we need next year. So, but we do know that not all blood biomarker tests are the same. So there are some that are on the market, but they haven't been validated. Why is that important? Because some of these tests that haven't been validated, you can't be guaranteed what you're seeing in the test is what actually is correlating to what's occurring in the brain. So the fact that FDA did approve a validated blood biomarker test, pretty significant. The other thing that's new is that the Alzheimer's Association worked with experts and released the first clinical practice guidelines for blood biomarkers. Again, that's important because we want to make sure they're utilized in an appropriate way, in an appropriate audience, with kind of the appropriate follow-up as well. So these recommendations are for use in individuals that have an objective cognitive impairment, which could include mild cognitive impairment, and for use only in a memory care clinical setting, so some sort of specialized care. One, they can be used as a triaging test. So a negative result would rule out the Alzheimer's pathology, and a positive result should be confirmed with another method, so cerebral spinal fluid or a PET scan. And it's also as important to rule out a diagnosis of Alzheimer's as it is to rule in. Second, the blood biomarker test could be a substitute for PET amyloid imaging or cerebral spinal fluid biomarker testing. So again, really helping clinicians understand the benefit and use of this sort of biomarker. Kind of cool? Really cool. So what's going on with current treatments? So what do you think of this slide? It looks like an eye exam test, doesn't it? Sorry about that. So within the last 2 years, we have this new this monoclonal antibody treatment, and this is pretty significant. It addresses the plaque buildup in the brain and had some really positive results in clinical trials. So we have two on the market, Leqembi and Kinsula. So they're still on the market, they're still there. What is exciting is through this international conference, I think there were about 5 studies that looked at what was the real world result. So we know that in a clinical trial, that's pretty a controlled setting. So in the real world, these drugs performed in as well in terms of safety and effectiveness or benefits to patients as the findings that the clinical trials produced, or better. That was really poorly worded and bad grammar, but I think you got my drift. Okay, so that's really exciting. The other piece is that these studies looked at patient satisfaction, and those who were participating with these treatments said that they were satisfied with the results of them and participating in them. So again, that's really exciting. Yes? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Do you want to hold questions to the end, or do you want to Yes. I didn't even get that question out before you had your hand up.
The biomarker test, as it is brand new and newly FDA approved, is it covered by Medicare yet?
And it's not, but that is one of the efforts bills that we're working on at the federal level, and Deepa would love to hear your voice. Did that summarize that one?
Are they doing clinical trials locally? Suggested that we do a trial at Cedars-Sinai, but it was, in LA, and getting there for all those trials and tests.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. So we do have a program called Trial Match, which I lovingly call the eHarmony of clinical trials. So it's a simple profile. It's available in English and Spanish. It's everything from who you are you a healthy individual? Do you have a first-degree relative with Alzheimer's disease? And kind of what you want to tolerate. I will say that there's not a lot going on here. The flip side of that, I'm being very Pollyanna today. The positive side of that is the Alzheimer's Association does award research grants to local researchers. So the other piece is, how do we build interest in clinical trials around Alzheimer's and dementia and caregiving here, so you do not have to go to a Cedars or up to Fresno?
This is a bad time to ask about the supplements. When I got active in my wife's life again with this dementia, her cupboards were full of supplements, gummies, everything that you could dream of. What's your
What is my opinion on supplements?
Yeah.
My opinion or the Alzheimer's Association opinion? A little different, right? So my concern with supplements is that they are not FDA approved. So most of them have not gone through a randomized control trial, which really is the golden standard. They are supposed to be honest in their marketing and what they state the findings are going to be. People will, kill me in the parking lot for saying we don't necessarily support them. Some people do feel that they are of benefit. I have not seen enough data that supports that. One more, and then I'm going to keep moving.
On that line, because I also am seeing a million things, and I have an early diagnosed husband with this. Prevagen, all of those. I want your opinion.
I can't answer it from me because I'm here on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association. Let's protect some liability issues. We do not recommend the use of some of these supplements to prevent or help with Alzheimer's. The data, which I know you don't want to hear, is stronger around nutrition, exercise, cognitive engagement. So, is anyone going to stab me on the way to the car?
No, because we're here to know.
You're here. Oh, this table has my back. I love it. So I did want to point out the bottom drug, which no one can pronounce, Zunzil. It's interesting because we had these cholinesterase inhibitors, which were really hot for a long time, and they're still very beneficial. One of the side effects is a lot of gastrointestinal problems. So this one drug that was released sort of quietly was formulated to lessen the gastrointestinal issues. So again, improvement on something that already exists. I mentioned this last year, but I find it to be really a fascinating idea of how do we repurpose current medications that could be a benefit to preventing or treating or kind of stalling Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia. So this was one on GLP, so your Wegovy, your Ozempic, and it showed some really interesting benefit. It was a small scale study. But this year, the research from AAIC came out really looking at that adults showed cognitive test scores similar to people 3 years younger for those who took a combination of drugs targeting vascular or metabolic conditions like high cholesterol, diabetes, high blood pressure. And because those are all known risk factors for dementia. So individuals who were on all three of those medications, or medications to treat those three conditions, had the greatest cognitive benefit. And for those who only took 2 of those medications or treatments, the most effective pairing for cognition protection was blood pressure and cholesterol drugs. So again, really looking at this idea of heart and brain being tied together and how they tie together. Is that kind of cool?
Very.
Thank you. See, this table's becoming my favorite. They talk back. So the idea that I'm going to focus on for the next 10 minutes is really about kind of risk reduction. And we know that there are some modifiable risk factors as well as some things we can't do too much about. We can't really do too much about our age, our genetics. But there are other risk factors that we can address. And I think it's also the idea that everyone has different risk factors. And individuals can make choices about how to change or address based on what their current risk factors are. So one of the ideas is that I know a lot of people have concerns because they have like an APOE4 or maybe a genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia. So this is a study that came out this 2 weeks ago, last month, that showed that individuals with higher genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease may benefit the most from healthy lifestyle interventions like walking. And that was supported by 3 large international studies. The key to this was making it a habit. So we all have good intentions for 2 weeks. But sticking with walking for at least 2 years produced cognitive benefits up to 7 years later. There was nothing on pound. Maybe next year we could put something like that in. But again, I think when we think of exercise, it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around it. But this is a nice way that walking really is supporting cognitive health. The Lancet Commission suggests that upwards of 40 to 45% of dementia cases could be prevented or delayed by targeting these modifiable risk factors. And by layering them, there is an added benefit. So the Alzheimer's Association led a 2-year randomized control trial called the US Pointer. So my other joke, and sorry if you heard this last year, this is part of a worldwide effort. That's the finger study. But we couldn't really use the fingers here because the finger in the US means a little bit different. So it's the US Pointer study. So it was 2 years randomized control. There was a self-guided group as well as a structured group. The structured group had more support from almost like a care navigator, a coach, and also greater accountability. What I loved about this study was these were 2,000 individuals from 5 different cities across the country, and they had suboptimal lifestyles, meaning significant room for improvement. And they all had a first-degree relative that had either Alzheimer's, dementia, or some documented or well-known memory problem. And it focused on increasing physical activity, improving nutrition, cognitive and social challenge, and health monitoring. So the high-level results just came out, so this kind of is like hot off the press. So the structured group showed the greatest amount of cognitive improvement. But what was interesting was that self-guided group also showed significant improvement as well in their cognition. And this cognitive benefit, it cut across gender, age, ethnicity, heart health status, as well as APOE4 genotype. So that's pretty significant because what we need are strategies that work for all of us, and all of us are so different. So this is really exciting. So it really kind of focuses on this, what is this recipe around physical exercise, health monitoring, cognitive exercise, and nutrition? So I'm always asked, they say, you're said to go walking, for how long, what intensity? So this really kind of breaks down and identifies what that secret special sauce is. So for physical exercise, it was 30 to 35 minutes of moderate to intense aerobic activity 4 times a week, plus strength and flexibility exercises twice a week. It's doable. It's very doable. Health monitoring looked at making sure individuals had regular check-ins for blood pressure, weight, and lab results. And the other one was nutrition. So I was really happy that Dr. Mancott talked about the MIND diet. So individuals in this intervention, the study, were placed on the MIND diet. And I guess the MIND diet kind of ranges from 1 is bad and 14 is perfect. Most of the people going into the study were somewhere around like a 6 or a 7. So again, not the best diet. They had to have adherence to the MIND diet, and actually, most of them said they actually enjoyed it, which is good. So what I think, and then the other last piece was cognitive exercises, and that was more of a computer-based. I think they had to do computer-based stimulation, like 30 minutes 3 times a week, and then met for social groups as well. So really a nice little rounded out study. What I thought was really interesting is that most individuals 1 to 2 years after the study are still adhering to it. They're still participating, which I think was really significant as well. So kind of cool? Okay, thank you. So we can do Q&A, or I can do like a quick research roundup on things I just kind of thought were kind of cool. What's your preference? I do what the people tell me. Research roundup. So these were 3 research buckets that I just thought were kind of interesting, and they made the news as well. So one was this idea that lead exposure was linked to memory problems 50 years later. So that era of like 1960 to 1974, that's really when that leaded gasoline was used at its highest. And so these individuals that were in areas with kind of the greatest airborne lead contamination reported reported memory problems 50 years later. So again, looking at how the environment impacts our brain as well. And this one study looked at, we can't go back and change what occurred in 1960, so what do we do moving forward? And in this study, it looked at if those who have had past exposure should focus on managing blood pressure, quit smoking, and avoid social isolation. So again, that kind of goes back to knowing what each individual risk factor or factors are for each individual, and then being able to adjust from there. The middle one was SNAP, which we also in California know as CalFresh. And individuals who were on the SNAP program over a 10-year period had, I need to get my grammar right. So individuals on SNAP versus not on SNAP, over a 10-year period had equivalent to a 2 to 3 year of additional cognitive health. And it really goes back to, again, the emphasis on good nutrition benefiting the brain. The last area was just kind of a bucket on women. So any guesses on what percentage of those living with Alzheimer's right now are women? Let's see how many retained this from last year. About 2/3. And why do you think that might be?
Women live longer.
Women live longer, and that's what we thought for the longest time. And we're starting to kind of eke out some of the other issues around that include like reproductive lifespan, number of births, number of miscarriages, age of menopause as well. These 2 studies looked at sort of the differences between men and women and their risk based on TBI, so traumatic brain injuries. So it seems as though there is more likely to have shrinkage in those dementia impacted areas of the brain in women over men. Not 100% sure why, but what does that mean to me? Always wear my helmet when I go for a bike ride. Make sure I don't have tripping hazards in my home. But again, it's what we can do to learn from these studies. The other was chemo brain, and this was kind of interesting. So we know with chemo brain, there are declines in thinking and memory reported by about 1/3 of women who have gone through breast cancer chemotherapy. And this is actually the first study that showed that brain changes, so inflammation and shrinkage related to that cancer treatment, were connected to symptoms like memory lapses, trouble focusing, and word finding problems. So it's growing evidence that chemo also has that impact on brain health in the long term as well. So again, it's just kind of, I said these were just interesting nuggets. You're subjected to my interest. Okay. So kind of quickly, if you do want more information, the Alzheimer's Association keeps a pretty hearty website around what is new. It is updated on a regular basis, and it's written in plain language, meaning we can all understand it. And then here is also the website, the alz.org/trial match, for individuals who might be interested in exploring, clinical trials and what might be available to them. Okay, so I think I have 8 minutes for questions.
I'm curious about like CPAP machine users in terms of Alzheimer's. My mother died of Alzheimer's 3 years ago, and one of the contributing factors that the doctors pretty much were on the same page is the fact that she would never use it.
So it's kind of like a twofold question, or twofold. One is just the role of quality sleep. So we do know that individuals need both quantity and quality of sleep, because that is when, it's sort of like the washing machine. When you sleep, your brain gets cleaned, sort of like a washing machine. And anything that is, it kind of interferes with that rinse cycle. Or my son broke our washing machine. He put all of the towels in at once, so I'm now used to things going off balance constantly, so maybe it just puts it off balance. And then the other piece is with sleep apnea, there is that disruption of airflow to the brain, which also has an impact. So I have not seen any data recently around it or studies, but we do know that sleep is important, and that anything that goes to the brain needs to be at maximum power too.
My question is, when a person has surgery, the anesthesia that they're given, how much of an effect does that have?
So I can't give like a specific answer, but we do know that individuals who go into surgery do tend to have like a marked increase in their cognitive problems afterwards, especially if there is a baseline of cognitive decline.
I was going to ask about inflammation and gut health and affecting the blood-brain barrier.
So gut health was so 2024 in research. And it's emerging, definitely an emerging area. So there have been some gut bacteria identified as protective and increasing the risk. But clearly significant amount of study needs to be done to kind of figure out what that might be. The other study that came out, so I was on the morning news and I had to give an update on constipation. And do you know how long they lectured me beforehand about what I was allowed to say? So there are a lot of terms you cannot use on the morning news related to constipation. But it actually showed that individuals who had fewer bowel movements in every 3 days had higher cognitive impairment. So again, you can kind of, it's an answer, but it's not really a great answer. Is it because of the medication? Is it lack of exercise? Is it lack of diet? Is there something else going on? So it is it's a bubbling up area. I didn't see any data come out this year related to it. In all of this, you can get AAIC 2025. You can get all the press releases from there if you're interested in learning more. Go to the press room, and a lot of times they'll link you to the actual research study. So thank you all.